All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
The cursor on Daniel's laptop blinked, a patient, silent metronome against the stark white of the airline's website. I needed to print my boarding pass for the conference in San Diego. My own ancient laptop had chosen this morning to give up the ghost, a spinning wheel of death, its final protest. Daniel was already at work, a text message. "Good luck today, my love. Drive safe." Glowing warmly on my phone. A lie. The words surfaced in my mind, unbidden, ugly. It had been surfacing a lot lately, a buoyant piece of wreckage from a ship I didn't know had sunk. It was the restaurant charge. 2 weeks ago, Le Marché, a French bistro in the city. 247 Team D, a celebration. A celebration. I'd scrolled through the statement, a mindless monthly ritual, and my finger had stalled. I'd asked him about it that night, over a dinner of pasta I couldn't taste. "Oh, that," he'd said, not missing a beat, his smile a little too quick. "Took the team out after we closed the Henderson account. Forgot to expense it. I'll do it Monday." A perfect, reasonable explanation. Daniel was a good liar. He'd had 12 years to practice on me. The browser on his laptop was still open. A single tab. Not his work email. A personal one. An account I didn't recognize. The username was a combination of his name and the year he graduated, College de Daniel 89. The password was saved. A single click. A betrayal of trust, yes. But trust was already a fragile, cracked thing in my hands. My heart wasn't pounding. It was a dead, cold weight in my chest. This was it. The moment the needle finds the groove on a record you never wanted to hear. The inbox was a monument to a double life. Dozens of emails, sent or sent end, received. The most recent, from yesterday, was titled Thursday. The sender's name was Catherine Leary. Cat. My breath hitched. My breath hitched. Cat. His college girlfriend. The one he said he'd lost touch with. The one he said was a lifetime ago. The email was brief. "Can't wait for Thursday. Le Marché again? I'll wear the black dress. The one you like. XO Le Marché." The black dress. The one you like. The world didn't shatter. It didn't explode. It simply deflated. The air went out of the room, out of my lungs, out of the 12 years we had built together. The carefully constructed reality of my life, the shared jokes, the quiet Sundays, the way he brought me coffee in bed, the solid, dependable weight of him sleeping next to me, collapsed into dust, leaving only this stark, unbearable truth on a glowing screen. I clicked print. The machine whirred to life behind me, spitting out my boarding pass, a ticket to a professional future that now felt meaningless. My hands were steady as I navigated to the sent folder. I needed to see it. I needed to carve the evidence into my soul so I would never, ever doubt the carnage. There it was, his response to her. "Nothing can keep me away. 7 p.m. I'll be the one counting the seconds." D. Counting the seconds. He'd written me a note with that same phrase on our first anniversary. I had it pressed in a book somewhere. A fossil from a dead era. A sound escaped me, not a sob, but a dry, hollow scrape, like stone on stone. I saw it all then, not as disconnected incidents, but as a chillingly coherent narrative. The new cologne, the work trips that coincided with her emails. The way he'd become distant, his physical presence, a ghost in our own home. He wasn't just cheating. He was reliving. He was building a new life with an old ghost, and I was the inconvenient remains of the present he no longer wanted. The printer fell silent. I picked up the warm sheet of paper. San Diego, my name, my seat assignment, 12B. A middle seat, trapped. I looked back at the screen, at the proof of my obsolescence. The love of my life was in love with a memory, and I was just the woman who shared his address. The carefully controlled scientist in me, the one who demanded evidence, had it now. An entire case study of deceit. And the woman, the wife, was disintegrating under the weight of it. I didn't cry. I closed the laptop. The click was final, like the closing of a coffin lid. I folded the boarding pass and put it in my pocket. I walked to the window and looked out at our quiet Seattle street, the drizzle painting the world in shades of gray. Everything looked the same. The rhododendrons were still blooming. The neighbor's dog was still barking. But nothing was the same. I was standing in the ruins of my marriage, and the only sound was the deafening silence of a future that had just been erased. The drive to Daniel's office was a study in surreal disconnect. My hands were ice on the steering wheel, yet my face felt feverish. I navigated the familiar Seattle streets. The turn onto Stewart, the left by the sculpture park on pure autopilot. My mind was a high-resolution replay of the evidence. Not just the emails from Kat, but the entire architecture of the lie. The late nights at the lab that were really dinners at Le Marché. The new, more expensive cologne he'd started wearing, a scent I now knew was for her. The way he'd been emotionally absent for months, a ghost in our own home, his physical presence a placeholder for a man who had already left. I didn't park. I pulled into the loading zone right outside the gleaming glass front of his biotech firm, put the hazard lights on, and walked in. My heart was no longer a dead weight. It was a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs. The lobby was all cool marble and modernist art, a temple of success and respectability. It was the perfect facade for the rot within. Amelia. Hi, the receptionist, Chloe, smiled brightly. Daniel's not expecting you, is he? What a nice surprise. I tried to mirror her smile. It felt like a crack in plaster. Just popping in. Is he free? Let me see. She buzzed his line. Daniel, your wife is here. A pause. I could imagine the panic on the other end of the line. The frantic shuffling of closing incriminating tabs on his computer. Okay, great. Go on up. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was an eternity. I watched the numbers light up, each one a countdown to an explosion I was about to trigger. The doors whispered open to his floor, all open-plan spaces and hushed professional chatter. I saw him before he saw me. He was standing by his assistant's desk, laughing at something, the picture of ease and charm. He looked like my husband. He looked like the man I'd built a life with for 12 years. The cognitive dissonance was a physical pain. Then he saw me. His smile didn't vanish, it congealed. It became a fixed, wary mask. His eyes flickered over me, quick, assessing. He knew. A guilty man always knows when the reckoning has arrived. Amelia? Hey, honey. Is everything okay? He stepped toward me, his voice a careful blend of concern and confusion. Perfectly pitched. He reached for my arm, but I took a half step back. The flinch was involuntary. His touch felt like a contaminant. We need to talk, I said, my voice low and surprisingly steady. It didn't sound like my voice. It was the voice of the research scientist, cold and factual. Somewhere private. The wariness in his eyes deepened into fear. Of course, my office. He led the way. I followed, hyper-aware of the curious glances from his colleagues. Look at them, a vicious little voice whispered in my head. They think this is a sweet marital visit. They have no idea I'm about to detonate his life. He closed the door to his glass-walled office. The view of the Puget Sound was stunning, a postcard of our life in this beautiful city. It was all a lie. What's going on, Ames? You're scaring me. He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. A defensive posture. He was preparing for a fight I hadn't even started. I didn't sit. I remained standing, pulling the folded printout of his credit card statement from my back pocket. I didn't throw it at him. I placed it carefully on the desk between us, smoothing it out with my fingertips. Le marché, I said. The two words hung in the air, heavy and final. He glanced at the paper, then back at me, his expression one of practiced confusion. What about it? I told you, that was the Henderson account dinner. You're a terrible liar, Daniel. My voice was still that calm, alien monotone. There was no Henderson account dinner. I checked your work calendar. You were in internal reviews all that afternoon, and your team was at a seminar in Tacoma. His face paled. The mask slipped, just for a second. I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the frantic search for a new lie, a better one. Amelia, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm thinking about Kat, Daniel. I cut him off. The name was a bullet. It hit its mark. All the color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence was more confirming than any admission. I'm thinking about all your Thursdays. I'm thinking about the black dress she wears for you. The one you like, his arms uncrossed. He sagged against the desk, his suwa vanishing. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut. You went through my email? The accusation was weak, a last-ditch effort to seize the moral high ground. A bitter, soundless laugh escaped me. That's what you're going with? You've been having a long-term affair with your ex-girlfriend, and you're angry I saw an email? My laptop died. I used yours to print my boarding pass. Your secret life was just there, waiting for me. The fight left him completely. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping to the floor. The shame was a tangible thing in the room, thick and suffocating. He didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. How long? I asked. The question was a formality. I didn't really want to know. The answer would only be a number to attach to the pain. 6 months, he whispered, his voice ragged. 6 months, half a year of lies. Half a year of him kissing me goodbye with a mouth that had tasted hers. Half a year of him holding me with hands that had touched her. The calm, scientific detachment finally shattered. The image of them together at that restaurant, laughing, him looking at her the way he used to look at me, it flooded my mind, vivid and cruel. The nausea rose, swift and violent. I thought I might be sick right there on his expensive office rug. Get out, I said, the words trembling now. Tonight. I don't care where you go. To her, to a hotel, I don't care, but you are not coming home. You don't get to sleep in our bed ever again. He looked up, his eyes wide with a new kind of panic. Amelia, wait, please. We can talk about this. It was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, Daniel. My voice finally broke, rising to a sharp, fractured edge that made him flinch. A mistake is a one-night stand, a moment of weakness you instantly regret. This is a 6-month, carefully constructed second life. You have a separate email for her. You took her to the restaurant we talked about trying for our anniversary. This wasn't a mistake. IOP. This was a choice. 1,000 choices. Every day, you chose her. You chose to lie to me. I turned and walked to the door. My legs felt like water, but I forced them to move. I couldn't be in that room with him for another second. The air was poison. Amelia, please, he begged from behind me, his voice cracking. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob but didn't turn back. I couldn't look at him. If I looked at him, I might shatter into a million pieces. The life we built, I said, my voice barely a whisper, aimed at the grain of the wooden door. It's over. You ended it. All I'm doing now is reading the obituary. I pulled the door open and walked out. I didn't look at Chloe. I didn't look at any of his colleagues. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead. A woman walking through the ruins of her own history on broken glass. The elevator doors closed, and only then, in the silent, descending box, did I allow the first silent, shuddering sob to escape. It was the sound of everything breaking. The house was a museum of us. Every object, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall was an exhibit in the curated history of Amelia and Daniel. I stood in the silent living room, the echo of the front door closing behind me still vibrating in the air. The confrontation at his office had been a clean, surgical strike. This was the messy, bloody aftermath. He wasn't home yet. I had time. Time to what? To prepare. There was no preparing for this. My first act was mechanical. I went to the kitchen, opened my laptop, the old dying one I'd miraculously revived with a hard reset, and found the playlist. It was ours, the one we'd made for our road trip down the Pacific Coast Highway years ago, songs about sunshine and open roads and being young and in love. I turned the volume up until the bass vibrated in the floorboards. It was a weapon. I was going to shatter the silence of this museum with the very soundtrack of its creation. Then I moved. I didn't think. I just acted. I went to our bedroom, and yanked open his side of the closet. The smell of him, that new, treacherous cologne mixed with the familiar scent of his skin, hit me like a physical blow. I started pulling out shirts, suits, sweaters. I didn't fold them. I dragged them out and threw them into a heap in the middle of the room. A growing mound of expensive fabric, of the identity he presented to the world. The successful biotech executive. The faithful husband. The lie. Next, the bathroom. His razor, his aftershave, the fancy hair product he'd started using 6 months ago, For her, it all went into a cardboard box. The items clattered against each other, a hollow, pathetic sound. The music swelled in the living room, a particularly joyous song about forever. I let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Kitty, forever. What a joke. I found myself in front of the bookshelf. There was a photo of us from our wedding. We were laughing, his forehead pressed against mine, my veil catching the light. I picked it up. My hands were shaking. For a moment, I saw only the love, the pure, uncomplicated joy of that day. Then the image shifted. I saw the man who, 12 years later, would look at another woman with that same intensity. I saw the fool I had been, believing in a promise that had an expiration date. I didn't throw it. I placed it face down on the shelf, gently, as if putting a wounded bird out of its misery. The key in the front door turned. The music was too loud. He probably hadn't expected me to hear it. But I felt it. The shift in the atmosphere. The intrusion. He stepped inside, his shoulders hunched against the wall of sound. He looked smaller than he had in his office. Defeated. He saw me standing at the entrance to the hallway, saw the mountain of his clothes in the bedroom behind me. His face crumpled. "Amelia," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. I walked to the stereo and turned it off. The silence that rushed in was deafening, ringing with the ghost of the songs. "You need to pack," I said, my voice flat. "Your things are on the bed." He just stood there, looking lost. Where am I supposed to go? I felt a flicker of something, pity, and ruthlessly snuffed it out. "I don't know, Daniel. Did you and Kat not make a plan for this eventuality? A cozy little apartment for your new old life?" He flinched. "It's not like that. It's exactly like that." The calm broke. The fury I'd been holding back surged up, hot and terrifying. "You don't get to rewrite this now. You don't get to minimize it. You have a go bag. You've had one for 6 months. So go, bag, get out." He walked slowly toward the bedroom, each step heavy. He looked at the pile of his life, tossed on the duvet like garbage. He picked up a sweater, a cashmere one I'd given him for Christmas. "Amelia, please, can we just talk?" Without yelling, "There is nothing left to say," I said from the doorway, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, holding myself together. "You said it all with every text, every email, every dinner date. You just didn't use your words." He started shoving things into a large suitcase he'd pulled from the top of the closet. He wasn't folding, he was just stuffing. Erasing himself from this space as quickly as possible. It was both satisfying and utterly horrifying to watch. "I'm sorry," he muttered, not looking at me. "You have to believe I never wanted to hurt you." The banality of the line was breathtaking. "But you did want to. You weighed the option, the risk of destroying me, of destroying everything, against what you wanted, and you chose what you wanted. Don't you dare tell me you didn't want to hurt me. You just hoped you wouldn't get caught." He zipped the suitcase closed with a violent, final sound. He had 2 bags. That was all he took. 12 years, condensed into 2 suitcases. The rest was just furniture. He stood there, holding them, a stranger in the hallway of his own home. This was it. The moment of leaving. The point of no return. "What about Eli?" he asked quietly, mentioning our child, away at a week-long science camp. A fresh wave of pain, this one so acute it stole my breath. Our child. The best thing we ever made together. "We will tell them together," I said, my voice cracking on the words. "When they get home, and we will be civil. We will be kind. We will not make them pay for your sins. That is the only thing you owe me now." "The only thing," he nodded, his eyes glistening. "Is it for us? For me? Or for the crushing weight of his own guilt?" I would never know. He walked to the front door, opened it. The cool, damp Seattle evening air swept in, smelling of rain and earth and an unbearable freedom. He paused on the threshold, looking back at me one last time. "I do love you, Amelia," and that was the cruelest cut of all. Because in that moment, I think he even believed it. I looked at the man I had loved for over a decade, the father of my child, my partner, my best friend. I looked at the hollowed-out stranger standing in his place. "No, you don't," I said, my voice quiet, certain, and utterly exhausted. "You just love the idea of someone loving you. Now get out." He left. The door clicked shut. The lock engaged with a sound that echoed through the empty house, through my empty chest. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. It was different now. It was no longer a waiting silence. It was a silence after the storm. The devastation was complete. I was alone in the museum of us, and every exhibit was a monument to a lie. I slid down the wall onto the floor, pulled my knees to my chest, and finally, in the overwhelming quiet, allowed the waves of grief to pull me under. The days after Daniel left congealed into a thick gray haze. I functioned. I breathed. I performed the necessary motions of life. I went to the lab. I stared at chromatograms until the lines blurred into meaningless squiggles. I attended meetings where my voice sounded like it was coming from another room. I was a ghost haunting my own life. The house was the worst. And I open. It was too big, too full of echoes. Every creak of the floorboards was his step. Every time the fridge hummed, I thought it was the garage door opening. I started sleeping on the couch because our bedrooms smelled like him and regret. I existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the world to make sense again. It didn't. The bottom came on a Tuesday. It was raining, a relentless, dreary Seattle drizzle that matched the interior of my soul. I'd gone to the grocery store, a futile attempt at normalcy. I stood in the cereal aisle, holding a box of Daniel's favorite sugary junk food. It was a habit and muscle memory of 12 years. I stared at the cartoon mascot on the box, and the reality of it, that I would never buy this for him again, that he was never coming back for it, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I must have made a sound, a small, wounded gasp, because an elderly woman next to me looked over, her eyes kind and concerned. "Are you all right, dear?" I dropped the box as if it were on fire. It hit the linoleum with a dull thud, spilling colorful O's everywhere. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. I turned and fled, leaving my half-full cart in the middle of the aisle, abandoning the scene of my own breakdown. I drove home blind with tears, the world outside the windshield a smeared watercolor of gray and green. I stumbled into the empty house, slammed the door shut, and slid down it to the floor, just as I had the night he left. But this was different. That was shock. This was the full, unfiltered agony. The grief wasn't just for him. It was for the future we had planned, the trip to Italy we were saving for, the silly dream of buying a vintage Airstream and touring the national parks when we retired, the way we'd hold hands when we walked through the university district, feeling young even as we grew older together. It was all gone, deleted. A project file corrupted beyond recovery. And the questions. They were a torment loop in my mind. What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? Was I too focused on my work? Did I not laugh at his jokes enough? Why wasn't I worth fighting for? The rational part of me, the scientist, knew these were pointless, masochistic queries. His affair was about his failings, not mine. But the wife, the woman whose entire identity was built around this partnership, didn't believe it. She believed she had been found wanting. She had been weighed, measured, and found deficient. I cried until my head pounded and my throat was raw. I cried for the betrayal, for the humiliation, for the sheer stupid waste of it all. I cried for our child, Eli, who would come home from camp to a fractured world, who would have to learn to navigate two separate lives instead of one united front. The guilt of that was almost worse than the pain. I was drowning in it. The silence of the house was no longer empty, it was accusatory. The walls seemed to whisper, failure. Abandonment. Fool, I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be in this museum of my own failure for one more second. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged hiccups. My eyes landed on my laptop, still open on the coffee table from this morning. An idea, desperate and insane, flickered in the storm of my panic. Iceland. The randomized prompt from some forgotten clinical list I'd generated weeks ago surfaced in my mind, taking a solo trip to Iceland with no plan. It had seemed like an abstract concept then. Now, it was a lifeline. I didn't think. I just acted. I went to a travel site, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely type. I didn't look for deals. I didn't check itineraries. I found the first available flight to Reykjavik that left tomorrow. I clicked purchase. A one-way ticket. I didn't book a return. I found a website for rental camper vans. I picked one at random, a tiny four-wheel drive thing that looked like a toy. I booked it for 2 weeks. I had no plan, no map, no idea what I was doing. This wasn't a vacation. This was an evacuation. I was running away, I knew that. But in that moment, running away felt like the only form of survival available to me. I couldn't fix my life. I couldn't stop the pain. But I could physically remove myself from the epicenter of the earthquake. I spent the rest of the evening in a frantic, numb daze. I threw clothes into a duffel bag. Thermal layers, a waterproof jacket, hiking boots. I didn't pack any of my usual nice clothes. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. I emailed my department head requesting emergency personal leave, citing a family crisis. It wasn't a lie. I texted my sister, the only person I could bear to tell, going away for a bit. Need to disappear. Will explain later. Please check on the house. Love you. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned off my phone. The next morning, I called a taxi. I didn't drive myself to the airport. I wanted a clean break. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house. I stared straight ahead, my hands clenched in my lap, my passport feeling like a foreign object in my hands. I was Amelia, research scientist, and I was shattering. I was boarding a flight to the edge of the world with no plan, no hope, and nothing left to lose. I was descending into the abyss, and the only way out I could see was through. The world outside the airplane window was a boundless expanse of steel gray ocean, and for the first time in weeks, my mind was as quiet as the void below. The frantic, panicked energy that had propelled me to book the ticket, pack the bag, and flee my life had burned itself out somewhere over Greenland, leaving behind a hollow, numb exhaustion. I was a shell, hurtling through the atmosphere toward an unknown point on a map. The landing gear groaned as we descended through a thick layer of clouds. Then, the landscape revealed itself. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Not green and soft like the Pacific Northwest, but harsh, primordial, and brutally beautiful. Black lava fields stretched to jagged, snow-capped mountains. Moss clung to rocks in great, green, spongy carpets. There were no trees. It was a land that had been born of fire and ice, a planet still settling into its skin. It felt appropriate. The Reykjavik airport was small, efficient, and humming with a low energy. I collected my duffel bag and found the rental desk. The man behind the counter handed me the keys to a tiny white camper van that looked like it could be blown over by a strong gust of wind. He started going over the map, circling campgrounds, gas stations, and must-see waterfalls. And remember, he said cheerfully, the weather here can change in 5 minutes. Sunshine to horizontal rain. Always have your waterproofs ready, I nodded, taking the map without really seeing it. A plan felt too much like my old life. I had no plan. That was the entire point. I got into the driver's seat. The steering wheel felt unfamiliar in my hands. I'd always been the passenger on road trips, Daniel behind the wheel, me in charge of the music and the snacks. Now, I was alone. The silence in the van was absolute. I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. I drove. I simply pointed the van away from the city and followed the road, Route 1, the ring road that circumnavigated the island. The 2-lane highway unspooled before me, a black ribbon through an impossible landscape. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Volcanic craters, vast glacial rivers, waterfalls that appeared around bends in the road, throwing great plumes of mist into the air. It was so majestic, so ancient, that my personal tragedy began to feel microscopic, insignificant. A tiny crack in a single rock in an entire valley of them. I drove for hours, the low Arctic sun refusing to set, casting everything in a long, golden twilight. My grief was a physical weight in my chest, but the sheer act of moving, of putting literal distance between myself and the ruins of my marriage, felt like the first conscious breath after being underwater. I pulled into a campground as the sky finally began to deepen into a dusky blue. It was nestled at the base of a glacier, the air crisp and cold. I fumbled with the van's tiny heating system, made a pathetic dinner of crackers and cheese, and then, because there was nothing else to do, I stepped outside. The cold was a shock, a clean, sharp pain that was nothing like the damp chill of Seattle. It woke up every nerve ending. I zipped my jacket up to my chin and looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. The sky was unlike any sky I had ever seen. Without a single city light to pollute it, it was a vast black velvet canvas, and it was littered with stars. Not the polite, scattered pinpricks I was used to, but a thick, swirling river of them. The Milky Way was not a faint smudge. It was a brilliant galactic highway, so vivid I felt I could reach out and touch it. It was terrifying and awe-inspiring. I remembered the randomized prompt: astronomy. It hadn't been a conscious choice. It had been a random selection from a list. But standing there, under the incomprehensible immensity of the universe, it felt like the only thing that made sense. My problems, Daniel's betrayal, the crushing weight of my failed marriage, it was all so small. We were all just tiny, temporary specks on a tiny, temporary rock, orbiting an average star in a remote corner of a galaxy among billions. The thought didn't make me feel insignificant. It made me feel free. The pressure to have it all figured out, to be the perfect wife, the successful scientist, the put-together woman, it evaporated under the cold, judging gaze of a billion distant suns. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was this moment. This cold air in my lungs. This stunning, silent beauty above me. For the first time since I'd found those emails, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't agonizing over the future. I was just here, present. A tiny, flawed human being standing on a rock in the North Atlantic, looking up at infinity. A single hot tear traced a path down my cold cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness for what I'd lost. It was a tear of awe for what was in front of me. It was the first tear that wasn't for him. It was for the universe, and for my tiny, newfound place in it. I didn't know any constellations. I didn't have a telescope or an app. I just stood there, in the silent, freezing darkness, and looked up. I picked a single, bright star and just watched it. I let the immense, silent piece of the cosmos wash over me, slowly filling the hollow spaces he had left behind. It was the first step. Not a step forward, not yet, but a step out of my own grief, out of my own story, and into something infinitely larger. The world outside the airplane window was a boundless expanse of steel-gray ocean, and for the first time in weeks, my mind was as quiet as the void below. The frantic, panicked energy that had propelled me to book the ticket, pack the bag, and flee my life had burned itself out somewhere over Greenland, leaving behind a hollow, numb exhaustion. I was a shell, hurtling through the atmosphere toward an unknown point on a map. The landing gear groaned as we descended through a thick layer of clouds. Then, the landscape revealed itself. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Not green and soft like the Pacific Northwest, but harsh, primordial, and brutally beautiful. Black lava fields stretched to jagged, snow-capped mountains. Moss clung to rocks in great, green, spongy carpets. There were no trees. It was a land that had been born of fire and ice, a planet still settling into its skin. It felt appropriate. The Reykjavik airport was small, efficient, and humming with a low energy. I collected my duffel bag and found the rental desk. The man behind the counter handed me the keys to a tiny white camper van that looked like it could be blown over by a strong gust of wind. He started going over the map, circling campgrounds, gas stations, and must-see waterfalls. "And remember," he said cheerfully, "the weather here can change in 5 minutes. Sunshine to horizontal rain. Always have your waterproofs ready." I nodded, taking the map without really seeing it. A plan felt too much like my old life. I had no plan. That was the entire point. I got into the driver's seat. The steering wheel felt unfamiliar in my hands. I'd always been the passenger on road trips, Daniel behind the wheel, me in charge of the music and the snacks. Now, I was alone. The silence in the van was absolute. I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. I drove. I simply pointed the van away from the city and followed the road, Route 1, the ring road that circumnavigated the island. The 2-lane highway unspooled before me, a black ribbon through an impossible landscape. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Volcanic craters, vast glacial rivers, waterfalls that appeared around bends in the road, throwing great plumes of mist into the air. It was so majestic, so ancient, that my personal tragedy began to feel microscopic, insignificant. A tiny crack in a single rock in an entire valley of them. I drove for hours, the low Arctic sun refusing to set, casting everything in a long, golden twilight. My grief was a physical weight in my chest, but the sheer act of moving, of putting literal distance between myself and the ruins of my marriage, felt like the first conscious breath after being underwater. I pulled into a campground as the sky finally began to deepen into a dusky blue. It was nestled at the base of a glacier, the air crisp and cold. I fumbled with the van's tiny heating system, made a pathetic dinner of crackers and cheese, and then, because there was nothing else to do, I stepped outside. The cold was a shock, a clean, sharp pain that was nothing like the damp chill of Seattle. It woke up every nerve ending. I zipped my jacket up to my chin and looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. The sky was unlike any sky I had ever seen. Without a single city light to pollute it, it was a vast, black velvet canvas, and it was littered with stars. Not the polite, scattered pinpricks I was used to, but a thick, swirling river of them. The Milky Way was not a faint smudge. It was a brilliant, galactic highway, so vivid I felt I could reach out and touch it. It was terrifying and awe-inspiring. I remembered the randomized prompt, astronomy. It hadn't been a conscious choice. It had been a random selection from a list. But standing there, under the incomprehensible immensity of the universe, it felt like the only thing that made sense. My problems, Daniel's betrayal, the crushing weight of my failed marriage, it was all so small. We were all just tiny, temporary specks on a tiny, temporary rock, orbiting an average star in a remote corner of a galaxy among billions. The thought didn't make me feel insignificant. It made me feel free. The pressure to have it all figured out, to be the perfect wife, the successful scientist, the put-together woman, it evaporated under the cold, judging gaze of a billion distant suns. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was this moment. This cold air in my lungs. This stunning, silent beauty above me. For the first time since I'd found those emails, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't agonizing over the future. I was just here, present. A tiny, flawed human being standing on a rock in the North Atlantic, looking up at infinity. A single hot tear traced a path down my cold cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness for what I'd lost. It was a tear of awe for what was in front of me. It was the first tear that wasn't for him. It was for the universe, and for my tiny, newfound place in it. I didn't know any constellations. I didn't have a telescope or an app. I just stood there, in the silent, freezing darkness, and looked up. I picked a single, bright star and just watched it. I let the immense, silent piece of the cosmos wash over me, slowly filling the hollow spaces he had left behind. It was the first step. Not a step forward, not yet, but a step out of my own grief, out of my own story, and into something infinitely larger. The Seattle rain felt different. It was softer, gentler than the biting Icelandic wind, but it carried the weight of memory. The taxi from the airport slid through familiar streets, past coffee shops and parks that were once the backdrop of my life. I watched it all through the window, a spectator to my own past. The camper van, returned at the airport, already felt like a dream. A powerful, life-altering dream, but a dream nonetheless. The house came into view. It looked the same, the rhododendrons were still there, the paint wasn't peeling. It was just a house. The museum had closed its exhibits. It was now just a building waiting for a new purpose. My key turned in the lock. The sound was deafening in the quiet street. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was still and smelled of lemons and emptiness. My sister had been there, God bless her. The floors were clean, the mail was stacked neatly on the console, the fridge was stocked with basics. There were no ghosts. Daniel's absence was a fact, not a haunting. The space felt neutral. It was a blank canvas. But the true test was yet to come. Eli was returning from camp tomorrow. The next day, I was a bundle of raw nerves. I cleaned things that were already clean. I rearranged the fruit in the bowl a dozen times. I practiced what I would say in my head, and every version sounded wrong, inadequate, a betrayal of the innocence I was about to shatter. The car pulled into the driveway. I saw them before they saw me, Eli, bursting with energy, talking a mile a minute to the camp counselor. My child. My heart. They looked so young, so untouched by the world's cruelty. The moment they saw me, they sprinted across the lawn, launching themselves into my arms. I held on tight, breathing in the scent of pine needles and sunshine and child. Mom, it was so awesome. We built a rocket and I learned the names of, like, 20 constellations. The word constellations hit me like a lightning bolt. A thread, thin and shimmering, connecting my solitary journey to this moment. That's amazing, baby, I said, my voice thick. I can't wait to hear all about it. We went inside and they talked, a torrent of stories about friends and campfires and marshmallows. I listened, nodding, smiling, my heart breaking with every joyful word. I let them unpack. I let them have a snack. I let the comfortable familiarity of home settle around them. And then, when they were curled on the couch, looking through their camp photos, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Eli, honey, I began, sitting next to them. We need to talk about something important. They looked up from the phone, their bright, intelligent eyes sensing the shift in my tone immediately. What's wrong? I took a deep breath. The scientist in me wanted to present the facts clearly, cleanly. The mother in me just wanted to gather them up and shield them from the coming pain. Your dad and I, the words were shards of glass in my throat, we love you more than anything in the world. That will never ever change. Eli's face grew still. They put the phone down. Okay, but, I continued, forcing the words out, we've decided that we can't be married to each other anymore. Dad has moved out. He has his own apartment. This is going to be your home with me, and you'll spend time with Dad at his place too. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I watched the information process behind their eyes. The confusion, the dawning understanding. The fear. Why? The single word was a whisper. Did I do something? No. I said it too forcefully, pulling them into a fierce hug. No, my love, no. This is absolutely not because of you. You are the best thing we ever did together. This is a problem between Dad and me. A grown-up problem. We both tried very hard to fix it, but sometimes problems are too big to fix. Are you going to get a divorce? They asked, their voice small. UN. Yes, I said, the finality of the word settling in the room. We are. And then they cried. Quiet, confused tears that wrecked me more than any of my own sobbing ever had. I held them, rocking gently, whispering reassurances into their hair. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry, it's going to be okay. We are still a family. It's just going to look a little different. We sat like that for a long time. When the tears subsided, they looked up at me, their face streaked and serious. Is Dad? Is he sad? The question was so empathetic, so selfless, it took my breath away. Even in their own pain, they were thinking of him. I think he is, I answered honestly. This is sad for everyone. But it's also what needs to happen so that everyone can be happy again someday. Later that evening, after I'd managed to get some food into them and we were watching a mindless cartoon, they spoke again, their head resting on my shoulder. Mom? Yes, sweetie? At camp, we looked at the stars every night. The counselor said the light from some of them takes so long to get here that the star might be dead already, but we can still see it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. That's right. It's like that, isn't it? They said, their voice sleepy. You and Dad. The love is like the light. It's not there anymore, but we can still feel it for a while. I held them tighter, my eyes burning with tears of pride and pain. My child, the philosopher. My child, the scientist. They had understood the cosmic metaphor better than I ever could. Yeah, baby, I whispered into their hair, my voice cracking. It's exactly like that. The return wasn't about coming back to my old life. It was about arriving in a new one. A life that was fractured, but a life where the most important piece, my child, was safe in my arms, helping me see the universe in a new way, even from the depths of our shared heartbreak. The weeks after Eli's return settled into a new, fragile rhythm. Our life became a Venn diagram of two separate existences, overlapping at the edges. Daniel would pick Eli up on Fridays, his car pulling into the driveway with a hesitancy that was so unlike his old, confident arrival home from work. I'd watch from the window as Eli ran out, a backpack slung over one shoulder, their greeting to him polite but tinged with a new formality that broke my heart. They were trying to navigate this new map just as we were. The house on those weekends was silent in a different way. Not the crushing, grief-filled silence of the early days, but a quiet space. I didn't fill it with music or noise. I allowed it to be. I'd clean, I'd read research papers, and I'd wait for the text from Daniel saying he was on his way back. One Sunday evening, after Daniel's car had pulled away, Eli came back inside, quieter than usual. They dropped their bag by the door and wandered into the living room where I was pretending to read. "Hey you," I said, putting the book down. "How was it?" "It was okay," they said, a standard, non-committal kid answer. They flopped onto the couch beside me. "Dad's apartment is weird. It smells like new carpet and takeout." I smiled faintly. It takes time to make a place feel like home. He ordered pizza. We watched a movie. They picked at a thread on the cushion. He asked a lot of questions about you. A cold trickle of anxiety ran down my spine. What kind of questions? If you were sad. If you were seeing anyone. They said it so matter-of-factly, but it felt like a violation. I told him, "You mostly look at stars." The anxiety melted away, replaced by a surge of protective warmth. My child, my brilliant, perceptible child, had given an answer that was both true and perfectly shielded. They had handed him a fact, but not a feeling. "That's right," I said softly. "I do." Eli was quiet for a moment. "Can we? Tonight?" "It's not too cloudy." The request was a gift. It was an invitation into their world, a shared interest that was entirely ours, untouched by the divorce. "Absolutely, let's do it." We drove out of the city, towards a park on the outskirts where the light pollution was less intense. It wasn't Iceland, but the sky was clear. I spread a blanket on the damp grass, and we lay side by side, looking up. "Okay, Professor," I said. "Teach me what you learned at camp," and they did. With a seriousness that made my chest ache with pride, they pointed out constellations I'd read about but never found. They showed me Cygnus the swan, and Lyra the harp. They told me the myth of Orion and Scorpius, forever chasing each other across the sky. "It's like they're connected," Eli mused, their voice soft in the darkness. "Even though they're enemies, their story keeps them together in the sky." The simplicity and depth of the observation left me speechless. We lay there in comfortable silence for a while, just watching. "Mom?" Eli's voice was small again. "Yeah, baby? Are you and Dad going to be like Orion and Scorpius? Forever connected even though you're, not together?" I reached out and found their hand in the dark, giving it a squeeze. "In a way, yes, because we're both connected to you. You're our brightest star. You're the one that keeps us in the same sky." They squeezed my hand back. It was answer enough. The following week, I took a step I'd been avoiding. I went back to the university. Walking into the lab was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The hum of the centrifuges, the smell of ethanol and agar. My colleagues were kind, professional, subtly avoiding the topic of my sudden leave. Well, I was grateful for it, but my focus was different. The work that had once consumed me now felt small, isolating. I'd spent years staring into microscopes at the infinitesimal, trying to solve the puzzles of cellular structures. It was important work, but it was a world contained in a slide. My world had gotten so much bigger in Iceland. I missed the vastness. During my lunch break, on a whim, I walked across campus to the physics and astronomy building. I found a bulletin board plastered with announcements for seminars, thesis defenses, and club meetings. My eyes scanned the notices, and then stopped on one. Seattle Astronomical Society, Public Star Party. This Saturday, 9 p.m. at Seward Park. All welcome. Telescopes provided, or bring your own. Dress warmly. A star party. The term was so silly, so joyful. It was the antithesis of my lonely, grief-fueled vigils under the Icelandic sky. It was community. It was shared wonder. I stood there for a long time, staring at the flyer. The old me, the one who was comfortable with solitude, would have dismissed it. The new me, the one who was trying to build a new normal, felt a spark of curiosity. I took out my phone and took a picture of the flyer. I didn't know if I would go. The thought of making small talk with strangers about eyepieces and nebulas was terrifying, but the possibility was there. A new thread, waiting to be pulled. That night, when I was tucking Eli into bed, I told them about it. A star party? They said, their eyes wide with excitement. That sounds so cool. Can we go? We'll see, I said, the classic parent non-answer. But seeing their enthusiasm, I felt my own resistance melting away. Maybe. The new normal wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a new future around the cracks, not in spite of them. It was about finding new constellations, new stories, and sometimes, just maybe, finding the courage to go to a party. The decision to go to the star party was made entirely by Eli. Their enthusiasm was a force of nature I couldn't withstand, and frankly, didn't want to. The terror of making small talk with strangers was a small price to pay for the light it brought back to their eyes. Saturday evening found us layering up in warm clothes, packing a thermos of hot chocolate, and driving towards Seward Park. Eli chattered the whole way, a stark contrast to my nervous silence. I was a research scientist, adept at presenting complex findings to rooms full of skeptics. But the thought of casual social interaction, of trying to be pleasant and interesting, felt like learning to walk again after a long confinement. The park was already dotted with the silhouettes of telescopes against the deepening twilight, their shapes like strange, modern sculptures pointing towards the heavens. Small clusters of people stood around, their breaths making little clouds in the chilly air. The atmosphere was quiet, respectful, almost reverent. It reminded me of Iceland. A man with a kind face and a vest covered in patches of galaxies greeted us. "Welcome, first time? Is it that obvious?" I asked, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. He laughed. "The look of overwhelmed wonder is pretty universal. I'm Mark. Feel free to wander around. Everyone here is happy to share their scope and their knowledge." Eli immediately dragged me towards the largest telescope, a magnificent beast that looked like it belonged in an observatory. We took our place in a short, quiet line. This I could handle. A queue, a defined order. I didn't have to talk, I just had to wait my turn. When we reached the front, an elderly woman with bright eyes smiled at us. "Ready to see Saturn?" Eli nodded, practically vibrating with excitement. She adjusted the eyepiece and helped them step up onto a small stool. A sharp gasp. "Whoa, Mom, it's real, it's really real, the rings." My own cynicism melted away at their joy. When it was my turn, I bent to look. And there it was. Not a picture in a book, not a pixelated image on a screen. Saturn. A perfect, minuscule ivory jewel suspended in the black, encircled by its impossibly thin, elegant rings. It was so crisp, so clearly there, that it stole my breath. It was a reminder that the universe's wonders weren't just for isolated, heartbroken women in camper vans. They were for everyone. They were for sharing. After that, we moved from telescope to telescope, a silent, shared pilgrimage. We saw the craters of the moon, deep and shadowed. We saw the Orion Nebula, a faint, glowing cloud of cosmic dust where new stars were being born. With each new sight, I felt myself relaxing into the shared wonder of it all. Then I saw it. Tucked away from the main group, near the edge of the water, was a smaller, more modest telescope. And next to it, a man was trying to wrestle a large, folded banner out of the back of a beat-up SUV. The banner was threatening to escape his grasp in the light wind coming off Lake Washington. Without thinking, my instinct to solve a practical problem kicked in. "Eli, hold this," I said, handing them the thermos. I walked over and caught one flapping corner of the vinyl banner. "Need a hand?" The man turned, slightly startled. "Oh, thanks. It has a mind of its own tonight," he grunted, pulling the other end. Together, we managed to get it unfolded and weighted down with rocks. The banner read, "Volunteer for Puget Soundkeeper Alliance. Community cleanup this Saturday." I froze. Volunteering. Community cleanup. The randomized prompts flashed in my mind with the force of prophecy. This was it. The mechanism of the universe clicking into place. "You're with the Soundkeeper?" I asked, my voice a little faint. He straightened up, brushing his hands together. He was tall, with a straightforward, open face and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He wasn't dressed like the other astronomers in high-tech gear. He wore a worn-out fleece and jeans. Guilty as charged. Trying to recruit some able bodies to help us with a shoreline cleanup. Figured this crowd appreciates beautiful things, might want to help keep one beautiful. His reasoning was simple, logical, and charming. That's a good strategy, I said, suddenly aware that I was making eye contact and having a conversation with a complete stranger without a single thread of anxiety. The topic was neutral, safe. The environment was benign. "I'm Alex, by the way," he said, extending a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, warm. "Amelia. And that's my child, Eli, over there by the big scope. A future astronomer?" he asked, following my gaze. "Present astronomer," I corrected gently. "They're teaching me," he smiled again, a genuine, easy smile. The best kind of teacher. He looked back at the banner, then at me. "So, any interest in trading stargazing for trash picking this weekend? I promise it's more fun than it sounds. We provide the gloves." Eli had wandered over, listening. "A cleanup? Like, we pick up litter?" "Exactly," Alex said, addressing them directly. "Help the ducks and the fish not get tangled in plastic stuff." "Can we, Mom?" Eli asked, their voice full of the instant heroism of childhood. "We have to help the ducks." I looked at Alex, then at Eli's eager face. The randomness of it, the sheer absurd coincidence felt less like chance and more like a door gently swinging open. It wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a meeting of eyes across a crowded room. It was a folded banner and a practical question. It was real, sure, I said, the word feeling both terrifying and perfectly natural. "We can help the ducks." "Excellent," Alex said, pulling a flyer from his pocket and handing it to Eli. "All the details are there. I'll look for you guys." We said our goodbyes and walked back towards the car, the flyer clutched tightly in Eli's hand. They talked excitedly about ducks and telescopes and the rings of Saturn. I was quiet. The encounter had been brief, mundane even. But something had shifted. For the first time in over a year, I had looked at a man who wasn't Daniel and hadn't seen a threat, a liar, or a reminder of pain. I'd just seen a person who cared about ducks and clean water, and who had nice, crinkly eyes when he smiled. It wasn't a spark of romance. It was something quieter, more fundamental. It was a spark of connection. A tiny, fragile proof that the world outside my grief still held simple, good, uncomplicated things. And that maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to step back into it. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a rarity for Seattle that felt like a sign. Eli was a whirlwind of energy, pulling on old jeans and a sweatshirt, already embodying the role of a heroic environmentalist. My own motivation was more complicated. Part of me was still the reluctant participant, doing this solely for my child. But another, quieter part was curious about the man with the crinkly eyes and the straightforward manner. The cleanup site was at a public beach on the Sound, a stretch of shoreline usually beautiful but currently littered with the evidence of human carelessness, plastic bottles, styrofoam chunks, frayed fishing line, and countless cigarette butts. A small crowd had gathered, a mix of retirees, college students, and a few families like ours. Alex was there at the center of it all, handing out thick gloves and large biodegradable trash bags. He looked more at home here in the daylight, practical and capable. "You made it," he said when he saw us, his smile genuine. He handed Eli a pair of gloves that were far too big. Our smallest volunteer. "I'm impressed." Eli puffed out their chest. "We're here to help the ducks, and the ducks thank you," Alex said solemnly, then handed me a bag. "Glad you came, Amelia. We got to work." The task was simple, meditative. Bend, pick up, straighten, move on. There was an immediate gratification to it, a tangible result of your effort measured in a filling bag. Eli took their duty with grave seriousness, pointing out every piece of microplastic with the excitement of a treasure hunter. After a while, Alex fell into step beside me, his own bag nearly full. "Not exactly the glamour of astronomy, is it?" he said, nodding at the piece of waterlogged cardboard I'd just retrieved. "It's satisfying in its own way," I admitted. "It's a problem you can actually see and solve." Unlike, I trailed off, not wanting to bring my personal chaos into this clean, simple space. "Unlike most things," he finished for me, his tone understanding. He didn't press. He just kept working, his presence easy and unassuming. We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the cry of gulls, the lapping of waves, and Eli's enthusiastic commentary from further down the beach. "So, are you a full-time duck savior?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. He laughed, a low, pleasant sound. Nah, I wish. I'm an architect. This is just a weekend thing. A way to give back to the city I help build up, I guess. Keeps me grounded. An architect. It made sense. The practical hands, the eye for detail, the desire to create order and beauty. What about you? He asked. What do you do when you're not saving ducks or looking at Saturn's rings? The question was innocent, normal. A standard getting to know you query. But for me, it was a minefield. My identity had been so intertwined with being a wife, a mother, and then a victim of betrayal. My career as a research scientist felt like a skin I hadn't worn properly in a long time. I'm a research scientist, I said, the title feeling foreign on my tongue. I work in a lab at the university. Cellular biology. His eyebrows raised in genuine interest. Wow, that's incredible. So you look at the very small, and he gestured to the vastness of the sound and the skyline beyond. I look at the very big, and we both end up here, picking up trash somewhere in the middle. The way he framed it was so simple, so poetic. It made me smile. I guess we do. The randomized prompt surfaced in my mind is always honest and transparent. It was just a line from a list, but as we talked, I saw it in him. He spoke without pretense. He didn't try to impress me with his job or his volunteer work. He was just, Alex, an architect who picked up trash on weekends. It was refreshingly uncomplicated. At one point, Eli came running over, holding a mud-caked, sodden teddy bear. Look, he's all alone. Can we keep him? We have to save him. The bear was a tragic, filthy mess. Before I could formulate a gentle refusal, Alex knelt down to Eli's level. That's a brave rescue, he said, examining the bear with serious consideration. But I think this little guy has been through a lot. He might be too soggy for a home. How about we give him a proper send-off? A thank you for his service? He gestured to the trash bag. We can let him rest. Eli's face fell for a second, then they nodded, understanding the logic. Okay. Bye, bear. They solemnly placed it in the bag. I watched the interaction, my throat tight. He hadn't dismissed Eli. He hadn't laughed. He'd treated their concern with respect and offered a kind, honest solution. The transparency wasn't just in his words, it was in his actions. By the time the cleanup was done and we were stacking our full bags with the others, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in a public setting for over a year. The anxiety that usually hummed under my skin was quiet. As people began to disperse, Alex walked over. I owe you both a hot chocolate for all that hard work. There's a decent place just up the road. It wasn't a line. It wasn't heavy with expectation. It was a simple, kind offer. A continuation of the morning. I looked at Eli, whose face was smudged with dirt but lit with happiness. I thought of the easy conversation, the lack of pretense, the honest way he'd spoken to my child. The old me, the one who was still healing, whispered caution. The new me, the one who had learned to look up at the stars, saw this for what it was, a connection. Simple, honest, and transparent. We'd like that, I said. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just saying it for Eli. The key to our new apartment felt heavy and light at the same time. It wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a symbol. A promise. Eli jiggled with excitement next to me, clutching a box labeled, "My Room," in their uneven, enthusiastic handwriting. Ready? Alex asked, his own key in hand. He wasn't moving in with us. It was too soon for that, a conversation we'd had with careful, honest transparency, but he was here. He had helped us pack, load, and now, unload. He was a part of this beginning. Ready, I said, and pushed the door open. The space was empty, all clean lines and sunlit hardwood floors. Our modern apartment in the city. It smelled of fresh paint and possibility. It didn't echo with the ghosts of another life. It was a blank slate, waiting for our story to be written on its walls. Claim the space, I announced to Eli, and they whooped, dragging their box down the hallway to pick their room. I stood in the middle of the living room, turning in a slow circle. This was mine, ours. Not a relic of a broken past, but a foundation for a carefully built future. Alex came to stand beside me, slipping his hand into mine. His grip was warm, solid, real. It's a good space, he said, not looking at the room, but at me. It has good light, and even better people in it. The move was chaos, but it was our chaos. We unpacked boxes, argued good-naturedly about where the bookcase should go, and ordered pizza eaten on the floor. Eli's laughter bounced off the bare walls, filling the space with a sound that felt like home. At one point, I caught Alex and Eli in a whispered conference over the assembly of a notoriously tricky shelving unit, their heads bent together. It was a simple moment, but it struck me with its profound normalcy. This was what health looked like. It was messy, it was collaborative, and it was built one honest moment at a time. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the Seattle skyline in shades of orange and pink, the three of us collapsed onto a half-assembled sofa, surrounded by a sea of cardboard. "I'm declaring a break," I said, leaning my head against Alex's shoulder. "My brain is full of instructions and my back is protesting." "I know the perfect remedy," Alex said, a familiar, easy smile playing on his lips. Eli's eyes lit up. Coffee shop mission? It had become our thing. The randomized prompt, made real, visiting every coffee shop in the city. We weren't trying to conquer the list, we were meandering through it, one Saturday at a time. It was our shared, silly, delicious ritual. A way to explore our city and each other. "Coffee shop mission," Alex confirmed. We found a new one, a tiny place tucked into an alleyway we'd never noticed before. It was our rules, no phones, no distractions. Just us, a warm drink, and conversation. We slid into a booth, Eli squished happily between us. The air was rich with the scent of roasted beans and steamed milk. "Okay," Eli said, taking a solemn sip of their hot chocolate. "New rule for the new house. Mom, you can't leave your star charts on the kitchen table during breakfast," I gasped in mock offense. "But that's prime study time. The celestial bodies wait for no one. The cereal bodies do," Alex deadpanned, and Eli giggled into their mug. We fell into an easy debate about household rules, each suggestion more absurd than the last. It was light, it was silly, and it was everything. This was the new family I hadn't dared to dream of. Not a replacement, but a creation. Something entirely its own. As we walked back to the apartment, the city lights beginning to twinkle like grounded stars, Eli ran ahead, chasing a stray leaf. Alex's hand found mine again. "You happy?" he asked, his voice quiet. I looked ahead at my child, dancing under a street lamp. I looked at the man beside me, whose honesty had been a balm to my suspicious heart. I thought of the new apartment, waiting for our lives to fill it. I thought of the vast, starry sky above us, the same one that had witnessed my shattering and was now witnessing my reassembly. "I'm getting there," I said, and it was the most honest answer I could give. Happiness wasn't a destination I'd arrived at, it was a road I was finally walking on, with good company. It's a process of constant recalibration, like tracking a celestial body. He smiled, understanding the language I was speaking. "Well," he said, squeezing my hand, "good thing I'm patient. And I have a good telescope for the journey." Back home, the apartment felt less empty. Our presence was already seeping into it. Eli, exhausted from the day, fell asleep almost immediately in their new room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes of toys and books. Alex and I sat on the floor of the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the glittering grid of the city. It was a different kind of astronomy, a terrestrial constellation. "Thank you," I said softly into the quiet between us. "For what?" "For being so transparently you. For not trying to be anything else. For understanding that my orbit comes with a pretty significant, wonderful moon." I nodded towards Eli's room. He was quiet for a moment. "You and Eli," he said, his voice low and sure. "You're the clearest night sky I've ever seen. After a long time of clouds." I leaned my head against his shoulder and we sat there in silence, watching the city breathe. The pain of the past was still a part of my history, a scar I would always carry, but it no longer defined my present. It was no longer the central star of my cosmos. Daniel had given me a story of betrayal, but I had chosen to write a story of resilience, of a love that was built not on passion's fever dream, but on trust, on shared silence, on a mutual respect for each other's scars and trajectories. I had gone from being part of a binary star system that had collapsed, to being the center of my own solar system, with a beloved planet orbiting me. And now, I had found a new star to share my sky with, not because I needed his light to survive, but because together, we created a new, beautiful constellation. The universe was vast, and often cruel. But sometimes, if you were brave enough to keep looking up, it would give you a new pattern to trace, a new light to guide you home.